first day kind of thing. So one thing I didn't mention last time is all these links at the top. I'll use different resources and different sites for the course. You saw me just setting up now. We're live on Twitch right now, so if you want to watch the live broadcast on Twitch, you know, it's 10 a.m. Not everybody wants to come all the way to campus. So if you're, not that I encourage you staying home, but the lectures will be live broadcast on Twitch, so you can watch them on there. The link's there. The only danger of watching on Twitch is if my Wi-Fi is not working as well as I want it to be, like it kind of is today. That might be an issue. The Twitch videos will be uploaded on YouTube after. They'll also be hosted on Twitch, but if you, for whatever reason, don't want to go to Twitch, they'll be on YouTube. Twitch will also delete them after 30 days, I believe 30 days, or 180 after I sign up. I forget what the dates are, but they'll delete it eventually. So I'll host them on YouTube, so they'll be up there for a much longer period of time. The other one, Discord. If you just want to chat, we have Piazza and Discord are the two like kind of Q&A and then a chat service. I'm sure you're familiar with both platforms. Piazza is going to be the more official one if you want to ask questions of myself, Nick, the TA, or just more official questions. If you need to post code to me or Nick, make a private post on Piazza, things like that, more official questions about the course content should go on Piazza. In Discord, that's more of a free-for-all. It'll be, I won't spend too much time on Discord, but if you want to talk to your classmates, just have more casual conversations, especially if they're related to the course, Discord's your place. Head over there and just kind of chat about the course. And then Autolab is set up. You should all be added to that by now. I set it up last night, around midnight, I think I set it up. So if you check it this morning, it'll be there. And the links for homework 1, the PDF and the zip file, or sorry, the text file and the zip file are up there so you can make those submissions. And I made one change while I'm here. I might as well quickly point this out. I made one quick change to the homework doc. I got this question a few times, so I just want to squash this one once and for all. That quiz on the CSE documentation, you don't have to take that quiz. We're not using any back-end tools on the UB hosting service, unless that's what you end up using for your project. You know, that's one thing. But it's not required for homework 1 at all. You don't have to take that quiz, so if you're struggling taking that quiz, you don't have to do that. One assumption I made, I realized that I can't quite make this. We don't really use it as much as we used to in the department, but you do have to SSH into one of the department's servers, typically Timberlake. So I linked some documentation from another course that they have some good documentation on how to SSH into those servers. The server is timberlake.cse.com. SSH into that, use your UBIT credentials, and you'll be able to access the server. You'll get a terminal, and you'll be able to work around in the terminal. If you haven't used SSH or terminal, that might take a little bit longer. Alternatively, you can FTP or SFTP. The second link here, if you take the second option, the ASCU option, they do have a quick tutorial on how to FTP your files into the server, which means you're uploading, you can work on your files on your laptop, and then upload those files through that FTP client. I forget which one they recommend these days, but some FTP client where you can open up your desktop, move those files over to the server, and then you have your website hosted that way. So either way you want to go, I would say the CSE one is a little more technical, but you also learn more, and you learn things that are going to be useful throughout your career if you're going into software development. So hopefully that clears up some questions. Any questions on the homework, those of you who are getting started on it? Yeah, it's on the course schedule, is where I'll have all the due dates. I'm trying to think of exactly where I have that. Yeah, right here. And I have the due dates for all the homework, so you can look through and plan accordingly. Typically, every Friday at midnight is going to be a deadline, either a homework or a project deadline. With Twitch, if any of you are listening and watching live, if there's any audio or video issues, if you could let me know, I'd really appreciate it. I'm watching it on my tablet here, but if I miss something, and especially I can't check the audio because I'll have a bad echo here, If the audio is bad, let me know. If you're listening to it to Twitch, please use headphones, just common sense things. Doesn't really apply so much in this room, but when I'm in a huge lecture hall with hundreds of students, sometimes if you're sitting next to somebody who just wants to talk all lecture, it's really helpful if you can just put in your headphones and listen to it on Twitch. You can still hear me nice and clear. It's probably not an issue here though. All right, with that, let's get into some content. So the slides are posted. They'll be posted like this. Click the slide symbol. You can get the PDF version of the slides. So you can open them right in the browser. I'm going to open it in Keynote so I can have some more presentation tools. So front-end development. So today we're going to learn about HTML and CSS. And these are like the two fundamental technologies of how to display a website to the user, how to get a browser to render what we call the front end of your website. Front end means everything the browser is running. After you get all the code for a website downloaded onto your machine, the browser is going to run all of that, all those files, interpret them, and then display it to the user. HTML and CSS are our two main ways how to do that, and then JavaScript, which we'll talk about on Friday. JavaScript to give it more interactivity and just more power in general. We'll bring in JavaScript for that. So HTML is our our structured language. The acronym there, hypertext markup language. Hypertext means any text that can link to other text. So the whole idea of a link on the internet, that's fundamental right from HTML. Right from HTML says we can link to other pages. So the idea of a link directly in HTML. And then markup language means that we're going to have a lot of content in our HTML that isn't content that will be displayed to the user. We're going to have a lot of markup to be able to tell the browser how to display things and where it should be displayed. So that's where we get our hypertext markup language. This is not a programming language. CSS is not a programming language. We're not doing any programming so far today. That's when we'll bring in JavaScript on Friday. That's when we'll start doing some actual programming. These are not programming languages. They're not what we call Turing complete. There's no idea of a loop. You cannot write a loop in HTML. You can't write a conditional in HTML. It's just not that type of language. It's a markup language, not a programming language. So I'll probably slip at some point, but if somebody calls HTML a programming language, they're wrong, and there are tons of memes about it, about people calling it that, but it's not a programming language. So here's some HTML. Here's our first little peek at what HTML looks like, and here's just a very basic website. So if we write this HTML in a text editor, IDE, wherever you're typing your code, see, I already messed up. Not code, it's not code. But wherever you're typing your stuff, type this up, save the file as something.html, open this file with your browser, and then you'll get this beautiful web page right here, your first web page, right there. So the structure of this, and the fundamental structure of HTML is based on elements, and these elements are defined by a start and end tag. So we have various elements throughout here. For example, we have an H1 element. This is a header 1, meaning the largest type of header that you can have. I want this to display nice and large on my web page. I'm going to call it an H1. Start the H1, end the H1, and anything in between and anything outside of these tags will be the actual content of the website that's displayed to the user, with the not really with the exception. But this will be the content of the page. So first web page, I want that to be a header. My content, I want that to display to the user as a paragraph of text, etc. So everything between those tags is part of that HTML element. The head tag is a special tag. It'll go on the top of our HTML, in between our top level HTML tag. The head tag, this is content that's not displayed on the page itself. Some of it will be displayed to the user. For example, the title is going to be displayed in the tab of the browser. That browser tab will have that content, but it's not displayed on the page itself. This is where we have a lot of meta information about the site. Here I'm saying that this is UTF-8 encoded. So that's the character set that the browser should use to render the content on my page. I'm going to use all UTF-8 so the browser knows what to do with that. The body is the actual content of the page. This is what's going to be displayed in the browser window itself, not in the tabs, not anywhere else. H1 we talked about, paragraph we talked about. And div is kind of a special type of element that doesn't really do anything in particular, but we use it very, very often to just mark things. We say, this is where I'm going to have some content, and I'm going to do something with that somewhere else. Most commonly, we're going to create divs like this, and then with our JavaScript, we're going to go into that div and start messing with it and actually make it display some actual content. For example, if you want Google Maps on your website, you would just have an empty div, and then in your JavaScript, you'd say, hey, Google Maps, I have a div with this ID, go put a map there, and then it'll go to that site and go to that part of your page and put a map, for example. We also have self-closing tags. Oh, that IMG not being blue bugs. But anyway, we have self-closing tags. These are tags where the open element, where the open and close tag is just the same tag. For this, we use a slash at the end of the tag name. We have a few special types of elements that will always be self-closing. Images, line breaks, horizontal rules. These are some of the more common ones that you'll see. So we don't always have to have an open and close tag. Some elements are just a particular thing. For a line break, we don't need to say, here's the start of the line break, here's the end of the line break. It's just a line break. So we have a self-closing tag for that. Same with an image. There's no start to the image, end to the image. It's just the image. So it's a self-closing tag that we use for that. So those are elements. Let's talk about attributes. In the open tag of an HTML element, you can specify any number of attributes for that element. And these attributes are key value pairs. Their key and value are both strings. The key name equals, and then the value in quotes as a string. So we can use this to add more information to an HTML element to have it either display differently or have certain properties, whatever we want to do with it. But this is how we can add a little more something to our HTML. Instead of just having a collection of elements, we can start giving them these attributes and start doing a little more with them. What I have highlighted here, this div, I have an attribute named ID equaling my div. So the ID for this div is my div. Okay. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm going through this fairly quick. And this will be a fairly quick lecture. There's nothing too technical here. It's just going over some definitions and things like that. But are there any questions while I'm going through this? I just want to take a quick time. Yeah.
Sorry, stupid question, but with HTML, if you make a syntax error, it'll just ignore it, right? It'll just continue rendering the page, right?
Yeah, for the most part. So the question is, if there's a syntax error in HTML, it'll just keep going. Yes, in general. If the browser can figure out what's going on, like it's going to try its best to figure out what you meant. So there's no such thing as like a compiler error. If you have one error, it's not just going to say, nope, you don't have a website anymore. But it will have to make some guesses. And sometimes it's going to make some guesses that end up rendering your page pretty good. Sometimes it's going to make some guesses that just destroy everything. For example, if you're missing one closing tag, you can really mess up your web page pretty good.
Is there any way to get it to show you syntax errors?
Yeah, let's, I'll go to a live demo and do that. Let me take the, was there another question up here? Yeah.
So head is just going to be, it's not going to be the button because that's just more for the browser showing it kind of thing, or what's, because that...
It's for information that we don't need to display on the page. Okay. So as we'll see when we get to CSS, we'll use that to import other files as well. Okay. We'll say, give me my style sheet, go grab this other file because that file applies to this website. Any meta information, if we want some keywords in there, we want some tags that are gonna help search engines optimize for searching for our site, things like that. Any information about the page that's not necessarily displaying on the page itself is going to go in the head. I think, let me do a live demo of that. We do have a little extra time today, so we can I do this quick enough? Oh, I can just go here. So if you go to any website, you can go to right click, go to inspect element. This is something that we'll be doing quite a bit this semester. Inspect element, and it's going to bring up our browser console with all kinds of information about this website. And we can go in here, and one thing we can do is make changes to the website, which is something we'll play with at some point. So say I delete one of the closing tags, I have an error in my HTML now. I'm gonna save that. Let's see if I can break this pretty good. We might not be able to break it inside the browser like this. I never really tried to break a site like that, but yeah, maybe I can't. It might have already rendered the DOM. Let's go to what I was going to do first. So let's go to my local version of this, and I'll go right into my HTML and just delete really anything. Week 1, let me just delete a few closing tags here. Oh, you're killing me. Come on. And I do get, my IDE will tell me here, but the browser console should also give me some errors. I got a little red squiggle that says element not closed. Let's refresh this. And the page will still render. Actually, HTML, the browser did a pretty good job on this one. So the page still renders. It shouldn't have, though. I think that didn't reload. No, it's just doing pretty good with that. No, that's why I opened the console. I think it was it first. Let's get rid of this div. Yeah, that's my first thought. It was loading from cache. Geez, maybe it still is. Well, apparently I can't break my site. I guess it's not the worst problem to have. But the point is made that the browser is going to do its best. Here's my disable cache button. I was making sure that was checked. Because if it was loading from a previous load, then, I'm not going to be able to break it. Yeah, and my tags are messed up and stuff. I just didn't mess it up enough. The browser was able to figure out, just guess, and just happen to render my page. Render my page and make it look okay. So, what this should break, no, it still works too. All right, just to make sure we can break this. I didn't mean to spend so much time on this one. Okay, there we go. So now it's all broken. So now we're broken enough that what the browser guessed really didn't render the content the way we wanted it to be displayed. So we finally got it. We broke the site. Yay. But so the point is, the takeaway here is the browser is always going to try. What we need to be aware of with this is a very common web development thing. You write all of your website, you open up a browser, it looks all right, and you're like, cool, let's publish this, we're done. But maybe you open it in Opera in my case, but when you open it in Chrome, Chrome renders it slightly differently and just guesses wrong when you have those errors in there. So having no errors is a good way to make sure that you're going to run smooth across all browsers. But you can still have mistakes and still have a web page that renders quite well. It's very possible that I still have errors in this in the course website somewhere, but it just renders fine regardless. All right, let's get back to the slides. So, with elements, the two big things to know. I'll go on this page. HTML consists of elements, and those elements have attributes. These are really the only two things that we need to talk about with HTML. Those are the two fundamental topics you need to know about HTML. You have elements. They're defined by an open and closing tag. Some elements are self-closing, so they only have one tag. And those elements can have properties, and then we'll use those properties to do magical things with these. That's how through properties, that's how we're going to link our HTML to our CSS and our JavaScript, is by giving them IDs in this case, classes that we'll see in CSS, and other properties that we have, char set that we have here, the language being English, things like that. So that's really it for HTML. There are a few little topics. Comments, if you want comments in your HTML, here's the syntax. HTML only supports block comments. There's no such thing as a line comment in HTML. And here's the syntax for it. There's your open and close comment. In Unicode, if you want special characters in your content, HTML will support Unicode, especially if your char set is Unicode. And you can have you can specify the Unicode character number and then display that Unicode character. This is actually more common than it seems. Usually you wouldn't want too many crazy symbols in your code. I don't know, maybe you do. But the big use case for this is adding a non-breaking space. So in your HTML, the browser is going to ignore any consecutive spaces. So if I have web, space, and then 1,000 more spaces, and then page, the browser is only going to render one of those spaces. So if I want more than one space, what I can do is add a non-breaking space, just a space character. I'm explicitly telling the browser, hey, I do want an extra space here. So I can have a non-breaking space as a named Unicode character. A lot of the common characters have names instead of looking up their Unicode code every single time we want to use it. We just remember the actual name for those ones. If I want a right arrow, if I want a non-breaking space, we have those available to us.
Is that one just the Unicode code?
Sorry, what was it?
The chess piece, that's just the Unicode code preceded by?
Yeah, 9820 just happens to be the code for that.
So you just look it up and plug that in.
So if you want characters like that, you want any Unicode on your page, there's one way you're able to do that. A few other common ones are less than and greater than, LT and GT. We'll talk about that soon.
So in that piece of code, will it render the top piece, space, another space, and then one page? Does it recognize the two spaces before the non?
You know, I was actually wondering that as I looked at it. It crossed my mind. I believe it would do 3 spaces, but it might do 2. It's something we'd have to run and check out. Hell, we can. Oops. I want to get through these slides first if we have some time at the end. We'll have to check that one out. My guess is that it would do 3 spaces. It actually also might be browser dependent. And that's it. That's HTML. So the main focus I want to have, I'll repeat it one more time, elements, attributes. That's what we really want to know about HTML. I encourage you to go to W3 Schools. For example, for your homework, I'm asking you to do a link, a list, and a table, at least one of each. And I didn't talk about any of those. This is part of the documentation reading expectation of the course. I do expect you to be able to go to W3 Schools or any other resource if that's not your resource of choice. Feel free to go wherever you want. And figure out, okay, what's the tag name for a link? What's the tag name for a list? How do I add elements to a list and things like that? With an understanding of elements and attributes, I expect you to be able to go through the documentation and be able to build those without me walking through each element. Especially for a 300 level CSE class, I think that makes for a really boring lecture at best. That's something that there are, I don't know if I want to talk about it, but there are other courses that do that, and they'll spend weeks going through what we just talked about, and it's very boring. You're much more technical than that. We're capable of a lot more, so let's move through this kind of content. All right, any questions about HTML with that? Well, that said, if you actually have questions, like I read the documentation on the list and I don't know what's up, you can always ask questions about it. I don't think you need that at this level, but if I'm wrong, let me know, especially during office hours. I don't have those posted yet, but we'll get there. All right, any questions on HTML? It's also likely that the majority of you have seen HTML and CSS already, so I don't want to spend too much time here on this kind of stuff. CSS. This is how we're going to add style to our websites. HTML is just, okay, H1, make this text big. Paragraph, put a line break at, I think before and after, if I'm not mistaken. This block of text. And things like that. CSS is where we're going to stylize that. If we want to mess with colors, fonts, anything like that, we're going to use CSS for that. So where HTML is focused on the organization and the structure of a page, CSS is focused on the style. And we keep these separate. It's always good practice, and I'm requiring it for homework 1, to keep your CSS in a separate file as your HTML. So your HTML, you're focused on one thing. What's the structure of this website? Where are the elements? How are they organized? How are they ordered? And then for CSS, you're going to say, okay, what colors should these be? How should they be stylized? What size should everything be? And things like that. You want to keep those separate, so you're thinking structure here, style here. If you start mixing those, it gets more difficult to maintain your websites. And in general, in any of programming, if you're mixing two separate trains of thought in a single piece of code, it gets very difficult to maintain as that code gets older, as it gets more complex, as you add more features. Anytime you can separate, separation of concerns is our buzzword for it. Anytime you can separate your trains of thought is going to help you maintain your code, help you expand your code as you're building a large project. So, I saw this mentioned, I think on Piazza already. You're not going to be graded on the quality of your CSS. You're not going to be graded on the organization of your HTML, anything like that. This is not an art class. We actually do have, I think, a DMS class on web design where you will do those things. You'll be graded on how pretty your site looks. That's not this course. I hope I made that clear day 1, but I'll make it more clear. Right now, if I didn't, we are focused on how your web applications work at the protocol level. How is the networking happening? How are we leveraging the internet? Things like that. I really don't care what your websites look like as long as they have the content that I'm requiring you to have. That said, if you do want to make pretty sites, which you should, I really strongly encourage you to do that on your own, but it's not going to appear in any of my rubrics. It's not going to be a part of my grading for this class at all, in any sense. That's why the CSS, I think I just said, use CSS to stylize 2 elements, I believe, is what I landed on. I really don't care what you're doing. I just want to know that you understand how an external CSS sheet can, CSS file can be applied to HTML to change the look of a website. If you understand that at a conceptual level, I'm happy. If you don't know how to pick out colors, which I don't know, I don't either, I don't care. I don't care if that. As we'll see on the next page, or 2 slides from now, I have a pretty ugly looking example. So this is what CSS looks like when we have a style sheet. Cascading style sheet is the acronym. I forgot to put that on the slide. So we have the style sheet, and we can specify the style of certain elements. So here, I want the background of the body of my page, the background of the whole page to be aqua. This is a named color. There's certain named colors similar to named Unicode characters in HTML. There are some named colors in CSS, aqua being one of them. So I want my background to be aqua. If I don't want to use the named colors, I can specify a color by text value, 2 digits for each of RGB, or you can do 1 digit if you have 3 characters. CSS will know what you mean. But you can specify the RGB values from 0 to 255. Here I got 255, 00, so this is going to be red. It's RGB, so red, 255, 0 green, 0 blue. And I also want to change the font size. There are all kinds of properties, just like HTML elements. I'm not going to go through all of the different properties that you can change with CSS, but I want to focus on this is how you change properties. And again, I'll refer you to W3 Schools. It'll give you all the lists of all the properties. There's documentation. You can look at every single property you can change and dive into the wonders of CSS if you so wish. So if I have this page that we had before and this CSS, this is what our page is going to end up looking like. The background of the page is aqua, as we wanted. The color of any text in a paragraph is red, and the size, the font size, is 50. So if we want to change the font size without using headers, and yeah, it's not pretty. It's there's no standards for how pretty your CSS is. If you want to use font size instead of H1s, H1 through 6, which is a common thing to do, the headers are kind of restrictive of what you can and can't do. If you want to change your font size with this, kind of thing to do. To import a style sheet, this is where we're going to go back into the head. This is something that's not necessarily displayed on the page. Something we want to put in the head. And we're going to say, hey, I have a style sheet. I want you to add to this web page. So when you open up this HTML, your browser's going to read that link and say, oh, I see that you are telling me that I need a second file to display this page properly. It's a style sheet, so I know that I have to get this second file and apply it as style to this page. It's specifically going to be CSS. This is what we call a MIME type, which we'll talk about quite a bit when we get into HTTP. And the hyperlink reference is style.css. That's the file name in this case. This is where I can find that file. It's the full path here. My style sheet is in the same directory as the HTML, so I don't have to specify a directory, but I have to specify that file name at least. So now that style sheet is going to be applied to this page, and I'm going to get my content looking super pretty. But there's one kind of issue with this. Is if I apply style the way we did that, if I say every paragraph should be red and 50-point font, well, that's kind of restrictive. That means every paragraph I put on my entire page has to have that styling. It's going to have that styling applied. That's not necessarily what I want. So what if I want 2 paragraphs? I want one to be red and one to be green. What if this is something I want? I'm not going to be able to do that with this style of CSS. Luckily, we have CSS classes. And this is something we'll use extensively through JavaScript as well. Classes, HTML elements, having classes is a fundamental thing we'll be using quite a bit. It's a very common thing in web development. So instead of saying every paragraph should have some style, here I still am doing that. Every paragraph should be 50-point font. But I'm also going to give these paragraphs 2 different classes. This first paragraph has the class red. It's whatever I want to name it. I just happen to name it red because I'm styling it as red text. Second one, class of green. And then say, if I have any paragraph with the class of red, and we use the dot operator to specify classes, any paragraph that has a class of red, apply this color of red to it. Any paragraph with a class of green, apply this color to it. Plain green. Now I can specify a different style for different elements based on their class. If I take this one step further, I can specify a style to any element of a certain class. Oh, I changed this example to show something else, and then I broke it. To show any element that has that class name, so you'll have to imagine, if this div had a class of green, now all the text in that div is going to be green. All the text in that paragraph of class green is going to be green. It doesn't matter what element type it is, it's going to apply to any element with that class. We do this just by leaving off the element type. If we just do dot, there's no, this would be like star dot green in other languages and other parts of the development world. If we just leave it blank in CSS and just do dot green, it'll apply to any element with a class name of green. So dot class name applied to every element with that class name. Element type dot class name, anything matching both the element type and the class name is going to apply to that. And just element type, it'll apply to every element of that type. So there we have some flexibility in what elements we apply each style to. We have one more option. I think less common in CSS, but very, very common in JavaScript once we get to that, is to specify the style of a specific element by ID. If we use the hashtag or previously # or number sign, that'll say any element with that, or the element with that ID is going to have this style applied. So if I have some element, I give it an ID. An ID is a special attribute in HTML, which has to be unique. If it's not unique, yeah, the browser will still try to render it, but you'll get warnings in your ID. It might break things, it might crash things. IDs should be unique, must be unique. I'll say it stronger. Must be unique, but if I give an ID to an element and go into my CSS and do this hashtag element ID, I can apply style to that one specific element in my CSS, or in my HTML. So now I want that double border around my div. I do it by ID. And I have this class of red, but since I have nothing that applies to that, if I had like a div.red or just a .red, that would apply. But I actually don't get any red in this div. But I do get my double border around that because I set that by ID. Any HTML element can have multiple classes. We just separate them by spaces. So if I want this div to have both green and wide as classes, here we go, separated by space. Implicitly, the class names cannot contain spaces. Pretty common in development, we're used to that. No spaces in class names. Any space is going to be a separate class. So there's two separate classes, green and wide. Said this earlier, but yeah, there's tons more you can do with CSS. You can also use different languages to generate your CSS. So there's a lot you can do. This is where I'm going to stop CSS for this class. Just knowing how to apply style to specific elements, that's what I want out of this class. And how to link that style sheet in the head of your HTML. Again, W3 Schools is there for us, or any other resource you find useful. All right, so I have that as a backup, but I want to just start mostly from scratch and build some website, and we'll check out that non-breaking space thing as well. So example.html, let's build a brand new website. And I'm going to cheat just a little bit. We'll redo this part. We'll redo all this. And we'll build some site. Let's start with the, I don't know, hello world. Not feeling creative at 10:40 a.m. Hello world. And we have this file set up. And if I go into my file system, and I just double click that file, it's going to open in my browser. It's going to display my beautiful website here that just says hello world. So let's try playing with this a little bit. Let's resize this, get back to my development. And, I dragged that instead of resizing. We'll get this. All right, and let's do a little counting. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we got 3 spaces on that. Answered. So at least in Opera, this version of Opera is gonna treat that as 3 spaces instead of 1. So let's give this, we didn't use blue. Yeah, so let's give this some style. We'll create a style sheet, and we'll say, I want any paragraph with the class of blue to be blue. So now that'll be my whole CSS. I want this CSS applied to my site. So I have to include it in my site. So I'm going to use that link tag. I'm going to blank on I have to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to blank on my rel. That's what it was. Relative to this page, it's going to be a style sheet. Type is text CSS, and hyperlink reference is cool.css. Doesn't like that self-close, but oops. And yay, we have blue text. So we created some HTML, opened that in our browser, created CSS, a CSS file, linked it to our HTML, and had that apply to our element, which is really all the concepts that I want to cover. Are there any questions, especially if there's something that you want to see in the code, or not necessarily code, but in the editor here? Anything anyone wants to see while we're in here? Yes.
Is that like it's gonna be like a recommendation and not an error, but like, would it be, is it yelling at you for cool.css because it wants it to be like
I think that's VS Code saying, hey, if you want to go directly to that file, you can jump over to it.
Oh, okay. So that wasn't a bad line.
No, but I can, if I give it an invalid file name, it should. I don't know if VS Code yells at me. Unable to locate, yeah. So if I name it wrong, it'll help me create a file that exists. Let's do one thing. Let's create a folder named style. Just to show that this is a full path. Right now, we're not going to have any style applied. Our text turns back. We have to specify that full path of where to find that thing. Oy. And this path can be a URL, can be a fully qualified URL. So if I want to grab my style sheet off the internet, I can grab it from here. I don't have an example off the top of my head for that one, but we could grab a style sheet from anywhere as long as it can be found by the browser, as long as we use the right style of href. We don't specify a protocol. It's going to use the same protocol it was used to find HTML. So I open that file on my hard drive. The protocol is file. It's just going to look for another file relative to the path where I open my HTML. So you can get away with not specifying very much here. All right. Any other questions? HTML, CSS, basic editing. I'm not quite sure what I recommend for an editor. I just started using VS Code. I think VS Code is going to be more suitable for lectures. I can make everything big with a touch of a button. A lot of people like it for general editing, so you can go with that. I've typically used WebStorm for my web development. Actually, I use PyCharm too sometimes. I recommend those. Those are nice IDEs. But VS Code is pretty good as far as just editing code. But building HTML, CSS, any text editor will do at this point. But yeah, I'm out of stuff. So let's see you Friday.